Back then, walking out of the movie theatre after watching The Time Machine, I couldn't shake the feeling of being overwhelmed and exhilarated. The image of the time machine kept spinning slowly in my mind, seasons of flowers blooming and withering behind the glass window, the howling wind in the Morlock caverns, and the silhouette of the Eloi girl standing motionless in a future that had forgotten how to defend itself. A safe film classic old Hollywood. But the older I got, the more carefully I rewatched it, the more that sense of calm began to crack. Did you know that the female Eloi lead was actually only 16 years old when filming began? That the male lead was once rushed straight to the hospital after nearly suffocating on set? That the iconic time machine was assembled from junkyard scrap? And that the ending, you know, is merely a cover after the original ending, deemed too dangerous to exist, was quietly executed in a closed-door meeting? Today, we reopen that time machine to travel back into the darker corners of the production and to the ending the film never wanted you to see. 15. The female lead was only 16, the detail that silenced the set. Back then, when watching The Time Machine, most audiences saw Weena as a familiar image from classic science fiction, innocent, fragile, almost out of place in the harsh world around her. A gentle Eloi girl, empty-eyed, soft-spoken, smiling, faintly more a symbol than a real person. What MGM didn't want you to know is this: Iet Mimu was only 16 years old at the time. Not almost, not nearly, a minor. Meanwhile, Rod Taylor, the time traveller, was 29, nearly twice her age. That gap was never mentioned in promotional materials. MGM deliberately concealed Iet Mimu's real age because they knew exactly why once audiences realised it, the image of fragile romance would instantly become unsettling. As a result, the set was tightly controlled. Their shared scenes were staged to the point of emotional sterility. No physical contact, no lingering glances, no private moments beyond what was contractually safe. Everything was sanitised through framing and blocking. Years later, George Pal admitted he was uncomfortable with the choice. His defence was that Weena was conceived as a creature of innocence closer to a child than a grown woman, an Eloi who had never fully matured in a decaying world. The problem is, that was true both on screen and in real life. And once you know this, it becomes hard to rewatch Weena's scenes without feeling something is off. Not because of the acting, but because of the thin, ethical line Hollywood quietly crossed, then pretended had never existed. 14. Rod Taylor nearly died from gas poisoning the scene where death stood just off camera. To this day, for most viewers, the Morlock cavern scenes in The Time Machine are simply dark, eerie, and a bit claustrophobic classic old-school sci-fi. The sets are often praised as just scary enough, suggesting danger while remaining safely entertaining. Few realise that the suffocating feeling wasn't created for the audience, it was for the actors inside the frame. The Morlock scenes were filmed on a sealed soundstage with a low ceiling and barely functional ventilation. To evoke a sense of a forgotten underworld, effects technician Gene Warren continuously pumped stage smoke mixed with dry ice. On screen, the fog drifted slowly, beautiful and chilling. In reality, it silently displaced oxygen with carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Rod Taylor inhaled the most. During filming, he developed headaches, nausea and dizziness. The crew assumed it was ordinary fatigue. No strange smells, no alarms, until Taylor could no longer stand. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed acute carbon monoxide poisoning. 30 minutes later, and the outcome could have been permanent brain damage or death. This was no minor incident. It was a near-fatal threshold. Production was halted for a full week. Ventilation systems were upgraded. Safety protocols were rewritten from scratch. Later, George Pal admitted it was the only time he was truly afraid on set. From that day on, he personally checked air quality before every underground scene, because he understood one thing clearly: from that moment the film was no longer science fiction. It had brushed against real death. 13. A time machine built from scrap, a masterpiece born in a junkyard. You can't forget that time machine. Massive, sitting in a Victorian-style room with exposed gears, brass levers, dial faces crowded with needles, and a chair like a throne for someone daring enough to challenge time itself. One look and you'd assume it was the film's most expensive prop, an icon forged from money craftsmanship and Hollywood excess. The truth, however, is bitterly ironic. The time machine in The Time Machine was not born in a glamorous design studio. It was cobbled together from scrap. With the budget squeezed tight, production designer William Ferrari turned trips to Los Angeles junkyards into a daily routine. Brass fittings were discarded. Junk clock components were defective parts. Car pieces were stripped wreckage. The control panel used real antique pressure gauges. The rotating disc came from an old industrial lathe. The red velvet was salvaged from a demolished theatre, and the glittering crystals were actually shards of broken chandeliers. Total cost about $5,000. On screen, it looked worth 10 times more. Ironically, the style later known as steampunk wasn't born from lofty artistic vision at all. It emerged because there was no other choice. That machine didn't just carry a character through time. It proved a very cinematic truth: when pushed into a corner, creativity will find its own way out. 12. The altered ending when the future was quietly cut away. Do you remember the ending of The Time Machine? The protagonist returns to the present, gathers books, takes 3 candles, steps into the machine, and disappears. Fade to black. Theatre lights on. A neat, harmless ending, just enough to let audiences leave without thinking further. But that suspicious neatness is the first sign that something was hidden. The truth is, that wasn't the original ending. Director George Powell filmed another version, one that left the internal screening room in silence. In it, the time traveller refuses to return. He stays in the future, stands with the Eloi, teaches them to read, teaches them to think, and dismantles a system where the weak are born only to be hunted. No metaphor, no ambiguity. A direct accusation to see injustice and walk away is to be complicit. That is why the ending was deemed unreleasable. In a closed screening, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer recognised the danger. Audiences wouldn't just watch the film, they'd be pulled into an uncomfortable position, forced to ask themselves where they stood in the real world. A piece of entertainment would become a moral challenge. Hollywood didn't sign up for that discomfort. The decision was swift, clean, and absolute: erase that ending. In its place came the ambiguous ending: we know, a safe ellipsis for the box office, but a fatal slash to the message. No one is forced to stay, no one bears responsibility. The future is wrapped up, labelled all good, and put away. 11. Rod Taylor was cast after James Mason turned it down a lead role born from disdain. As someone who has watched The Time Machine countless times, I believe no one could embody the time traveller more convincingly than Rod Taylor. From his intellectual yet approachable demeanour to the mix of curiosity and scepticism in his eyes, as the machine starts up to his shock at a future where humanity has split itself apart, every reaction feels profoundly human. The irony is, this Rod Taylor almost wasn't in the film at all. MGM initially set their sights on James Mason, a major star, a gold standard of serious acting. Mason read the script and flatly refused, dismissing time travel as childish nonsense, unworthy of a serious actor. Several other stars did the same. At the time, science fiction was seen as B-movie territory, a career downgrade. As the list of rejections grew, George Powell proposed Rod Taylor, an Australian actor who was still relatively unknown. MGM executives were openly sceptical. Taylor had no star power, no box office guarantee. In the end, the studio agreed for a very Hollywood reason: Taylor was cheap. And ironically, that seemingly stopgap choice produced a character ordinary enough for audiences to believe that if someone really did build a time machine, he would probably look like Rod Taylor. 10. George Powell, and a 15-year pursuit of a dream deemed outdated. Some films are born at the right time, others exist only because one person refuses to give up. For The Time Machine, that person was George Powell. In 1945, just after World War II ended, Powell purchased the rights to H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. At the time, he believed naively, by Hollywood standards, that a Victorian-era time travel story could still resonate with modern audiences. For the next 15 years, Powell carried that dream from one major studio to another, receiving the same answer over and over with brutal consistency. No. Studios said the story was too old, too slow, too intellectual. Time travel with tweed jackets and afternoon tea. It wouldn't sell tickets. Not fashionable, not necessary. Hollywood wanted monsters, wars and bright colours, not sombre reflections on humanity's future. But Powell didn't quit. He had loved the novel since childhood and believed cinema wasn't just about following trends, it was about preserving important ideas. Finally, in 1959, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer agreed to greenlight the project with one cold condition, an $800,000 budget, modest even by 1960 standards. Powell accepted immediately. He knew this might be his only chance. 15 years of rejection didn't weaken his resolve. It sharpened his vision. By the time the cameras rolled, he knew exactly what story he wanted to tell, and that not a single minute could be wasted. Sometimes a film isn't born at the right moment. It's born because someone waited long enough that making it became the only option left. 9. 6 months for a few seconds when time is the most expensive thing. If there is one moment that makes The Time Machine immortal, it's the time-lapse sequences. Flowers bloom and wither. Mannequins change outfits by decade. A city ages before your eyes. In just a few seconds, centuries pass smooth, mesmerizing, almost effortless. But what moves fastest on screen is what took the longest to create. These scenes used no CGI, no digital fast-forwarding. They were made with handcrafted stop motion, the most merciless method when it comes to time and patience. The rule was simple and brutal: 24 frames equal 1 second of film. Each frame required stopping the camera, adjusting the set, altering the smallest details, mannequin clothing shop signs, props, lighting even layers, hanging dust. One mistake meant starting over. The famous shop window sequence alone required over 2,000 manual adjustments. No undo button, no shortcuts, just people a clock and exhaustion accumulating frame by frame. In total, the crew spent more than 6 months completing these time-lapse shots. Nearly half of the film's production time was devoured by moments that seemed to pass in an instant. The irony is, clear audiences think time moves too fast in those scenes. For the filmmakers, time nearly stood still. That was the price of turning an abstract idea, time itself, into something you can see, feel and remember, even if it only exists on screen for a few fleeting seconds. 8. Nuclear apocalypse. The moment science fiction became real, there is a scene in The Time Machine that triggers the same reaction in me every time: silence. No suspense, no dramatics, just a chill down the spine. A blinding white flash, a city erased. Everything ends too quickly, too cleanly, as if the world never existed. It turns out that scene wasn't acted at all. George Powell didn't build models or paint matte backgrounds. He used real nuclear test footage provided by the United States Atomic Energy Commission. The towering mushroom clouds, the shockwaves flattening structures. These were documentary images filmed for scientific and military purposes, then inserted directly into an entertainment film. When the movie was released, many parents reacted angrily. Children weren't watching a movie scene, they were witnessing a real vision of humanity's apocalypse. Years later, some officials admitted they regretted allowing the footage to be used. It was too real, too cold, too terrifying. The irony is this: in a film about the distant future, the most horrifying scene comes from the present. No monsters, no Morlocks, just humanity holding weapons powerful enough to erase itself in a matter of seconds. 7. The actors who played the Morlocks monster roles paid for with real bodies. The first time I saw the Morlocks, I always thought of makeup, rubber, lighting, camera angles, a layer of artifice enough to make them terrifying. But the truth behind those creatures was even more brutal than what appeared on screen. The Morlock costumes were full-body rubber suits weighing nearly 16 kilograms, completely sealed with no ventilation system. Once the cameras rolled, the temperature inside soared above 38 degrees. Actors could only endure 50 to 20 minutes at a time before being forced to strip out of the suits to avoid fainting. Many collapsed from heat exhaustion. Some had to be hospitalized. They were not lead actors. They had no privileges, no voice, and most bitter of all, their names never appeared in the credits. In the film, the Morlocks are an underground class, forgotten, exploited, dehumanized. In reality, the people who played the Morlocks lived through much the same thing, working under extreme conditions, enduring in silence, then disappearing from the film's history. Perhaps this is the most bitter irony of The Time Machine. A film about social stratification recreated that very injustice on its own set. 6. H.G. Wells's son, when the film was seen as a betrayal. For audiences, The Time Machine is a somber work of science fiction. For G.P. Wells, it was a stab in the back to his father's legacy, H.G. Wells. After seeing the film, G.P. Wells publicly condemned it for stripping away the socialist message of the original novel. In his view, the Eloi Morlock conflict was not mere fantasy, but a direct warning about class struggle. And the film committed an unforgivable act. It softened that warning. He called it a Hollywood product that castrated my father's warning. George Powell pushed back. He argued that in the context of the Cold War, an overtly political message would have ensured the film was never released. For the film to exist at all, compromise was unavoidable. That argument has never truly ended. It raises an uncomfortable question: when adapting a work, should cinema remain absolutely faithful to ideology or sacrifice part of its soul simply to survive? The Time Machine chose the second path, and the cost of that choice remains debated to this day. 5. The controversial Oscar of Victory the creator never stepped on stage to receive. When The Time Machine is mentioned, many proudly recall that it won the 1961 Academy Award for Visual Effects. A clean win, the right film at the right time, at least on paper. But looked at closely, it becomes one of the most bitter moments in Oscar history. Because George Powell, the person who directly created and supervised most of the film's visual effects, did not receive the award. The reason sounds quintessentially Hollywood. Under the rules at the time, directors or producers were not eligible for technical categories, even if they did the majority of the work. Instead, the Oscar was awarded to the officially credited effects department. Powell remained seated in the audience, applauding, silent, never stepping onto the stage. Years later, Gene Warren, the man officially credited with the award, admitted plainly that George Powell was the one who truly deserved it. Powell didn't just devise the technical solutions, he personally tested them, refined them, and took risks with both time and budget. The Oscar belonged to the film, but the glory slipped through the hands of the man who made it. 4. The mannequin scene that almost vanished 15,000 islands for a few seconds of history. There is a scene in The Time Machine that nearly everyone remembers: mannequins in a shop window, changing outfits across decades, silently showing the passage of time. No dialogue, no characters, just clothing, light, and history. But few people know how close this scene came to never existing. The reason was simple and brutal: money. The mannequin sequence consumed more than $15,000 in costume costs, an enormous sum for a film with an $800 million budget. MGM considered it a pointless luxury. Cut it. The audience will still understand that time passes. George Powell disagreed. He knew this wasn't mere illustration. It was the visual heart of the film, the moment where time becomes visible without explanation. Powell fought relentlessly. argued, delayed production, and won. The result was one of the most iconic scenes in science fiction history. What the studio once saw as waste later became the film's most remembered moment. In cinema, sometimes the most expensive thing is the one thing you cannot afford to cut. 3. An actor fired for drunkenness 3 days were enough to vanish from the film. Not every behind-the-scenes drama of the Time Machine carried artistic weight or lofty ideals. Some stories were far more ordinary and very brief. Sebastian Cabot was cast in a supporting role, not large, not central, but substantial enough to leave an impression. Yet, after just 3 days of shooting, he was fired. The reason was unambiguous: he showed up on set intoxicated. In 1960s Hollywood, many bad habits were quietly tolerated, but on a production already strained by budget issues, accidents, and a tight shooting schedule. This was the final straw. Cabot was dismissed immediately. The consequences were significant. Every scene involving him had to be reshot from scratch. Time was burned, money was lost, morale dropped. His name still exists in film history, but in the Time Machine, he remains only a marginal footnote, a reminder that on a film set, talent does not excuse a lack of discipline. 2. Banned in the UK when a film was deemed too frightening for children. When the Time Machine was preparing for release in the United Kingdom, many assumed it would be a formality. An adaptation of an H.G. Wells novel with a classic sensibility, what trouble could it possibly cause? The British censors thought otherwise. After review, they delayed the release by 6 months. The official reason: the film was too violent and too frightening for children. Not just the Morlocks, but also the apocalyptic imagery scenes of war and the pervasive atmosphere of despair were deemed unsuitable. In a British film culture still cautious about dark science fiction, the Time Machine was seen as crossing a line. As so often happens, censorship produced the opposite effect. News of the delay spread. The press speculated. Audiences grew curious. Just how terrifying did a film have to be held back? When the film was finally released, ticket sales exceeded expectations. What had been considered dangerous for children became a powerful draw for audiences. 1. Rod Taylor and the theft that was quietly approved. Some behind-the-scenes stories sound like jokes, yet reveal a great deal about how Hollywood actually works. This is one of them. During the production of The Time Machine, Rod Taylor was frequently required to work overtime, often without additional pay. For an actor who was not a major star, that was not easy to swallow. So Taylor did something very human. He took home a small-scale model of the Time Machine, a prop used for close-ups and display. No paperwork, no permission, no fuss. He simply treated it as unpaid wages. MGM found out and they calculated quickly. A lawsuit expensive, bad publicity worse. A model prop, not worth the trouble. The studio looks the other way. Taylor kept the model. No one was disciplined. And so the Time Machine, the symbol of the entire film, truly travelled away from Hollywood, ending up in the home of the very man who sat in it on screen. An ending almost too perfect to believe a film about taking the future away from the present, and its leading man did exactly that in real life. The Time Machine was not created under ideal conditions. It was made with too little money, too little safety, too little consensus, but with an excess of something rare: stubbornness. Perhaps that is why the film is still remembered more than half a century later. Not because it is perfect, but because it bears unmistakably human marks, mistakes, conflicts, sacrifices, and decisions that never have complete answers. A Time Machine does not merely carry its characters into the future, it carries the film itself through time, along with all its cracks. If these behind-the-scenes stories have changed how you see the film, leave a comment which detail surprised you the most. And if you want to keep opening the darker, stranger, yet vividly alive backstage doors of classic cinema, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.